Tension between migrants grows over Europe's asylum policy. Despite huge gains against malaria, we'll take a closer look at the challenges that remain. And from cyberbullying victim to anti-bullying activist, a YouTube star's journey. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. The situation is tense in Burkina Faso on Tuesday as army troops have entered the capital Ouagadougou to negotiate the surrender of the coup leaders, General Gilbert Diendéré. The leader of the elite presidential guard that seized power last week said in a statement Monday that he will step down as the country's de facto leader at the conclusion of talks mediated by the Economic Community of West African States. Civilians cheered on the streets of Ouagadougou as armed forces arrived, but many feel the ECOWAS plan was too lenient on the junta.
We are strongly opposed to an amnesty. I think what they did was despicable and they must face justice. You can sympathize with the rank and file. I think they were manipulated, but the officers must go before a court.
Well, meanwhile, the French ambassador says interim President Michel Kafando has been released. On to Europe now, to the migrant crisis. Europe faces the difficult task of processing hundreds of thousands of refugee applications and identifying those in genuine need of asylum. But as Henry Ridgewell reports from the Croatian-Serbian border, there are claims that some migrants are carrying fake Syrian passports, creating tension with the Syrian nationals.
This has been Eastern Europe's answer to the migrant crisis. Bust them to the border and pass the problem on to the next country in line. These migrants were taken by Serbian authorities to the border with Croatia. They were waved off and left to walk over the frontier. Along the path through the cornfields, VOA spoke to 3 Syrian men in their early 20s. They asked not to be identified and were quick to voice anger at some of the other migrants.
Too many people here have a Syrian and IDs, passports, and they are not Syrians. Yeah. They are from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, too many.
And actually, I'm really shocked because this is our problem, this is our case.
Yes.
But Iraqi migrant Sadek told VOA he and his family should be entitled to asylum as they are escaping the Islamic State terror group known in Iraq as Daesh.
You must know this information for all the European. The Daesh is not know just the Syrian, because the Daesh is coming from Iraq and the Syrian and everyone. That hit for everyone.
Mohammed, an asylum seeker from Afghanistan, voiced resentment at the focus on Syria.
Syrian refugee is all of process is very high, but the Afghan refugees no. All of things for Syrian, not for Afghans. I don't know why this.
Who is a genuine refugee fleeing conflict or persecution, and who is a so-called economic migrant escaping poverty or looking for a better life? Hungary, which is building fences on its southern borders to keep out all migrants, wants Europe to enforce the distinction.
A joint European force that is able to stop illegal migration and establish the protocol by which we are able to separate genuine refugees who are in real need of shelter from those who are only economic migrants.
European leaders will hold an emergency meeting on the crisis Wednesday. Many say part of any solution will be identifying the genuine refugees. But migration experts say the distinction is rarely black and white. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News on the Croatian-Serbian border.
Well, up to 1.4 million children have been forced to flee Boko Haram's insurgents in northern Nigeria and in neighboring countries. UNICEF says around 500,000 others were displaced in the last 5 months after a sharp rise in attacks by the terrorist group. Now, the Nigerian army has freed the last few towns still under some form of Boko Haram control, but internally displaced people are still reluctant to return home. Boko Haram has retaliated with a renewed wave of raids and suicide bombings. At least 80 people were killed in multiple bomb attacks in Borno State Sunday evening. The attacks occurred only days after a new audio message surfaced, purportedly from Boko Haram leader Abubakar Shekau, calling for the Nigerian army liars for saying troops have regained territory from militant group. Well, the excitement is reaching a fever pitch for the arrival of Pope Francis in the United States in less than 4 hours. The pontiff comes to Washington, D.C. Tuesday after celebrating a third and final Mass on the island of Cuba. The pontiff celebrated Mass at the shrine of Cuba's patron saint, the Virgin of Charity of El Cobre, which he visited after arriving in Santiago late Monday. Francis arrived in Santiago after celebrating Mass early Monday in the eastern Cuban city of Alguien, telling tens of thousands of people to heed Jesus' invitation to overcome resistance to change. Pope Francis met with Fidel and Raul Castro in Havana at the start of his Cuban trip. Several leading dissidents have criticized the Pope for not accepting their requests to meet him during his visit. Now, for more on the pontiff's visit to America and look ahead to his planned trip to Africa, my colleague Esther Githu-Yuwat is here to tell us. Esther?
That's right, Vincent. The pontiff's visit in the U.S. has elicited excitement, and the enthusiasm is also building in Africa for his upcoming visit in November. I sat down with one of the priests in a Catholic church in Silver Spring, Maryland, whose choir will be performing during the papal visit here in Washington, D.C. The excitement surrounding the Pope's visit to the U.S. is building as thousands are hoping to be a part of this historic visit. Father Jacek Ozichowski of St. Camilla's Catholic Church in Maryland says the Pope's message will not only be to preach the Word of God, but also to address issues facing the world today.
Holy Father will bring the message of hope, but also of challenge, especially challenge to the leaders of the United States. In a few months, there will be a climate change conference in Paris. I mean, a very decisive moment in the history of kind of humanity.
During his visit, the pontiff will also address the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Father Jacek sees this as an opportune time for His Holiness to speak directly to the leaders of the world.
I'm hoping that he will continue to kind of challenge them, especially those from the richer nation, to do what they must to address the issues of poverty, of injustice, of climate change. Jesus said to those who have been given much, much will be required.
The continent of Africa also awaits His Holiness Pope Francis' visit this November. He will visit Kenya, Uganda, and the Central African Republic. Julie Sarwat, an immigrant from Tanzania, works at St. Camilla's Catholic Church, which also holds a multicultural mass every Sunday. She hopes the pontiff will address the issue of corruption.
I'm sure he's going to talk about corruption, because most of our leaders are corrupt, and we take so much. They take so much from the poor. Even the aid that is being given to the country, sometimes most of it does not go to do the project. It goes to somebody's pocket.
The Pope has also demonstrated his commitment to improving relations between Muslims and Christians, an issue the Vatican says he will address during his visit to Africa.
We have problems with different kind of religions fighting, like the Muslims and the Catholics, or Christians and the Muslims. Things are not that all right. So since we all believe in one God, we expect that he will say something about unity for us to live in peace.
This leader of the Roman Catholic Church is also known as the Pope of the Poor, who does not shy away from speaking his mind. But how does Father Jacek characterize His Holiness?
I see Pope Francis being a person of great integrity, not only living simple lifestyle, something that inspires a lot of people, but also continuing to challenge the powerful.
For now, all eyes are on the Pope's visit in the United States, and analysts will be delving deeper into his speeches throughout his stay. The Pope has a very busy schedule ahead. He is set to address the U.S. Congress Thursday and the UN General Assembly on Friday in New York. Vincent?
Thank you very much, Esther. Now, we mentioned earlier that Nigeria's militant group Boko Haram has increased its attacks in parts of northeastern Nigeria and claimed that the army there is lying, that it has taken over a large territory that it has been controlling. Now, for more on that, we're joined by Colonel Rabi Abubakar, is Nigeria's defense spokesman. He joins us from Abuja. Colonel, welcome to Africa 54.
No, we do.
Colonel Abubakar.
Okay, maybe just check. If you don't answer, then we just forget about it.
Colonel Abubakar. Colonel Abubakar, you're talking to me. Hello, Colonel Abubakar in Abuja. Looks like he's in a conversation that is not related to my question. We'll probably get back to him in a moment, hoping that the line there to Abuja will cooperate. Let's take a short break now, and let's know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vincent Makori. Coming up, combining herbal and traditional medicine on a tiny Indian Ocean nation. Stay with us.
Pope Francis is coming to America. VOA follows the Pope's historic visit. From Washington, D.C., where he'll address Congress, to New York City, and on to Philadelphia. VOA's coverage of Pope Francis' historic visit to America, beginning Tuesday, September 22nd.
This is Greenbeat for a healthier planet.
Race for Water is island hopping across the globe, but this is no pleasure cruise. The crew is making a global assessment of plastic in the ocean and concentrating on 5 areas where the pollution is especially bad. Frederic Siaka is a scientific advisor for the group. He spoke via Skype.
The idea is to stop on every remote island located in the center of the Gyres in order to assess the plastic pollution.
Plastic is not just an eyesore for sun-loving beachgoers. Once it breaks down, says Siaka, it gets into the food chain.
This is more like a soup and a mix of microplastic and big macro debris.
Siaka says the plastic can be eaten by marine life, even by tiny plankton. The Race for Water hopes its odyssey across the oceans will raise awareness of the issue.
To change minds and to maybe change the laws regarding waste management.
Siaka says the crew has been shocked by what they've seen so far, calling the plastic trash a disaster. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Greenbeat.
Let's stand now for our Tuesday health report, and joining us is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Vincent. The island of Seychelles in the Indian Ocean off East Africa has a rich history of herbal medicine. The emergence of modern medicine and proper hospitals hasn't stopped a number of Seychellois from visiting the handful of known practicing herbalists.
Ferdinand Vido takes his gardening quite seriously. The rolling land surrounding his house grows almost every kind of herb available in the Seychelles. This garden is the storehouse where he natures and picks plants to blend medicine for his ailing clients.
While I've chosen the herbs to mix together to make medicine, I have to consider the letters of the alphabet because there are certain letters that are actually good for the mixtures.
Traditional medicine has been practiced since the country was established back in 1770. With descendants hailing from Africa, Asia, and Europe, the knowledge of plants from the 3 continents has been passed from generation to generation. There are skeptics who would think that the practice is black magic and superstitious. However, it is common to find a variety of plants with medicinal properties growing among flowers in the front yards of many homes. The Ministry of Culture's National Heritage is licensing herbalists to pass on the information to future generations. What qualifies a medicine man is the authenticity of his products, knowledge and willingness to work alongside the Ministry of Health. Thérèse Berbès is a research assistant in the Ministry of Culture.
Herbalists, it's the kind of thing that we promote in Seychelles because they form part of our traditional benefiters. And Also, as our work entails of working with both tangible and intangible heritage of Seychelles.
She has worked closely with Ferdinand, who has sent some of his medicine to the National Heritage Institution for marketing. There are a total of 30 registered herbalists in the country, and he is among the 4 who have a medicinal garden.
I respect him a lot. He's a very knowledgeable person, and he always finds ways to keep in touch with the local people.
Various parts of the plants are used for different purposes. The bark and leaves for making infusions, leaves for use in preparation of bath, roots and even the sap used separately or combined with others. Ferdinand's knowledge is legendary. Even UNESCO sought his advice on the global catalogue of plants they are putting together.
When I go to see the doctors, they appreciate me. They talk to me. They ask me a lot of questions. We consult each other, and sometimes they send me people who they cannot treat themselves to my own practice.
This former agricultural officer believes he would have been a proper doctor had he gone to school. He intends to pass on these skills, but his current joy is caring for his green gold, which is the balm in the lives of the people needing relief from disease.
We turn now to malaria. Researchers and doctors have made incredible gains against the disease, but as VOA's Carol Pearson reports, experts say much more work is needed, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where the mosquito-borne disease is endemic and people get malaria year-round.
Close to 80% of malaria cases are in sub-Saharan Africa, and most of those patients die, according to the World Health Organization. Dr. Tom Frieden, director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, saw that for himself when he visited West Africa.
As I walked into the hospital, I walked in with a father who was carrying his 4-year-old son who was dying from malaria. So it's still a deadly problem in Africa. We need to persist in our activities, expand them, and also figure out new ways to stop this terrible disease.
Frieden says more children should sleep under bed nets, and both children and adults need to receive better medical treatment. In addition, new treatments have to be developed.
We're seeing real problems with drug resistance. Use of the pills that have combinations of what are called ACTs or artemisinin combination treatments in place should reduce the likelihood that the drugs that people take cause resistance in the malaria parasite. But we're seeing pesticide resistance to some of the pesticides in the bed nets.
In West Africa, until very recently, most medical resources went to fight Ebola, and malaria patients went untreated.
Whenever you have more malaria cases going untreated, what that results is first of all, one result is more malaria deaths.
Mateusz Pluczynski, a CDC researcher, spoke by Skype. The CDC found that untreated malaria surged in Guinea during the height of the Ebola epidemic and caused far more deaths than the Ebola virus. Pluczynski said the findings likely hold true for Sierra Leone and Liberia as well. Although funding increases have led to unprecedented treatment and prevention efforts in sub-Saharan Africa, more needs to be done.
We have to continue to find breakthroughs on malaria, to look for a vaccine or a way to control mosquitoes more effectively, because malaria remains a horrible challenge.
Experts say malaria can be prevented. The challenge is to do it. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Atlanta.
That's our Africa Health Report for today. Vincent?
Well, Lino, thanks a lot. Now, be sure to watch Lino Madu's Health Reports every Tuesday and Thursday on Africa 54. Well, the slowing Chinese economy and the strengthening U.S. dollar have wreaked havoc on many currencies in African nations. But how much of a risk is this currency crisis to African economies? Africa 54 business correspondent Alexis Christophorus recently spoke with Damina Advisors Chief Africa Markets Analyst Sebastian Spio-Gabra for some answers.
Sebastian, thanks so much for joining us today. And as Chief African Analyst at Damina Advisors, you have come up with something called the Commodity Collapse Stability Index. That came out earlier in the year. Before we talk more about it, why don't you first tell us what it is?
Well, it's an index that we put together at Damina Advisors, trying to see the effect that the falling commodity prices would have on those over-dependent commodity countries. So you think of the big countries whose significant amounts of their GDP come from the commodity sector. I mean, if commodity prices fall dramatically, it will have an effect on their revenues, and the fall in the revenues will have an effect on their ability to govern those states effectively. So essentially, that's what the index attempts to do.
So what are the findings of the index thus far? Which countries are you finding are most at risk because of the drop in commodity prices?
So it's essentially, you know, the big countries, obviously, that most people in the world are concerned about are Saudi Arabia and Russia, and even shale oil in the United States, i.e. Texas. But we at Damina Advisors are particularly and specifically focused on Africa, and especially the frontier market. So we really try to drill down directly on the 54 African countries. And what was stuck to us was that South Sudan and Libya came up as the most vulnerable countries in terms of potential instability and even potential state collapse. And we have seen over the last few months that both countries have witnessed significant stresses. And in the case of Libya, I mean, Libya is particularly exacerbating the migration and refugee issues in Europe. So frankly, we listed all the countries, and South Sudan was #1 in terms of potential for state collapse, Libya, and then Central African Republic, and then we go down to other countries. And almost all these countries have over almost 60% of their revenues coming from oil and energy.
So is the answer here long-term diversification for these economies in order for them to survive?
Yeah, part of it is diversification, clearly, but part of it is also, you know, how to utilize these resources in such a way that when oil prices go down or go up, you survive. For instance, if you think of a country like Norway, Norway is almost as exposed to gyrations in oil prices as is Nigeria or as is Angola. And yet Norway, nobody thinks of Norway imploding because oil prices have collapsed. The reason is because the Norwegians have found a way of saving a significant chunk of their oil price or oil revenues during the good times, and have set up a very big sovereign wealth fund that invests in other sectors abroad, so that when oil prices go down, they have like essentially a savings fund. And unfortunately, most of the African nations, because of their severe infrastructural deficits and budgetary problems, they haven't been able to save as much during the boom times.
So what did your index find in terms of the healthier African nations with regards to commodities?
Well, you know, if we think of the index from the bottom, I mean, Ethiopia was one that stood out. Rwanda was another that stood out. Kenya was another of the big countries. Seychelles, Mauritius. Essentially, the countries that are clearly well diversified away from overdependence on commodities, and these are the well-run countries. I mean, if one thinks of Rwanda, or one thinks of Mauritius, or one thinks of Seychelles, or one thinks of Kenya, they are relatively well-run. So there's also a high correlation between how well-run a country is. It's one way to think about it is almost it's like thinking about, you know, the price of gas at the tank and how good your engine is. If your engine is really good, I mean, you don't use as much gas. So essentially, those African countries who have bad or relatively weak institutions and who haven't been able to save as much, who are not very efficient, but who are also exposed to commodities, have been hit much harder. So again, like that contrast between Norway and Angola, or between Norway and Nigeria, I mean, commodity prices would decline in both cases, but Norway would be fine and Nigeria would not, for exactly that reason.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insights today and sharing with us the Commodity Collapse Stability Index of Damina Advisors. Sebastian Spio-Garbra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And
I'm Alexis Christophorus, VOA News for Africa 54, New York.
Well, thanks a lot, Alexis. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, how a cruel YouTube video transformed one young woman into an anti-bullying activist. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. Burkina Faso army troops have entered the capital Ouagadougou to negotiate the surrender of coup leaders. In Somalia, at least 7 people were killed and 10 wounded when a car bomb exploded near the presidential palace in Mogadishu.
That unfortunate incident took place today.
In Nigeria, at least 54 people were killed in a series of blasts in the northeastern Nigerian city of Maiduguri. Finally, we stay in Nigeria, where UNICEF says that a number of children displaced by the Boko Haram violence have hit 1.4 million. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
For Here's What's Trending, a special YouTube star brings her anti-bullying message to Washington. The documentary, A Brave Heart, follows Lizzie Velasquez on her 26-year journey from childhood to motivational speaker to present-day activist, taking the discussion of bullying to Capitol Hill, urging lawmakers to take action on the issue. The 58-pound Velasquez was born with a syndrome that prevents her from gaining weight. At the age of 17, Lizzie found a YouTube video dubbing her the world's ugliest woman and read the hundreds of comments that teased and cruelly mocked her appearance. Instead of hiding, Lizzie launched her own YouTube channel and a star was born. A Brave Heart drops in the U.S. on September 25th. And that's what's trending today, Vincent.
Well, thanks a lot, and that's our show for today. And have a good evening until we see you next time.
At stake is the basic human right of the woman and child.
This is a struggle against humanity, and we all need to join hands and do what we can do.
Women are not being heard, so we need to be doing a lot more.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I'm Sally Field, and I believe women are the best agents of change. These women from around the world are leading the way to challenge the status quo and motivate the next generation.
Let's move on and take a step in this journey.
Access to preventive care information and access to health care is a fundamental right.
It really makes me think about how I can contribute to the next generation.
These women bring us one step closer to realizing women's rights as human rights. Only on VOA.